Good morning, everybody. Good morning.
Good morning.
It is
Gloria.
wonderful to see
Gloria.
you.
Hi, Gloria.
Sorry I missed the other two meetings, but I did catch up and study.
Excellent.
So,
We have one person who has decided to binge watch. So they're waiting for the whole thing to be over, and then they're going to watch one class over another. And the funny thing is, they're going to see all sorts of different stuff. But I'm glad you're here. And based on your shirt and your sweater, I'm going to say you're still in Pennsylvania.
oh, I'll be here for a while.
Oh, all right. All right.
Yeah. I'm
Looking
not
forward
going
to
anywhere, so I don't know when I'll come to Florida. So
All right.
I have to be patient.
Well, I'm going to work on that. So I'm anxious to see you, as is everybody else. And same goes for the Ashleys as well. So anyway, it's wonderful to see you. Let us go ahead and begin today in prayer. The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Also
with you.
Let us pray. Loving God, we ask that you bring your presence around us and in us. Help us to remember that the only thing that separates us from you is the thought that we are separated. So Lord, remove those thoughts from our minds. Help us to embrace you in this moment. Help us to remember that today is a gift, tomorrow is not guaranteed. And so Lord, we thank you for all that you've given us. Help us to do your will, and as Benedict teaches, for us to go do something about it. And so, Lord, we ask that as we do these things, as we study about hospitality, help us to remember to be hospitable to each other and to strangers. And Lord, send your Holy Spirit into the most inhospitable places in this planet where your love and your grace will take root. And Jesus, we pray these things in your name.
Amen.
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 All right, so welcome. There are good parts about this book, and then there are hard parts about this book, and I have decided to take only the hard parts. So you're welcome. Talking about the presence of God, talking about hospitality, talking about forgiveness. Yes, we're going to go just into the hardest things that there are to do. But I think you would expect that in our class to do this. So this week we're going to jump into hospitality. Before we jump into that, however, I wanted to see if you had any thoughts or any questions from last week that have come up, or things that you wanted to mention or discuss. So from last week, I don't know if you noticed, but I actually preached on Benedict and his toolbox and talked about the presence of God, talked about, practicing the awareness and presence, about keeping death in front of us, which has not been easy, and then about doing something about it, which tends to be easier to do, at least for me. And so yesterday I was buying a birthday card for my dad. And maybe it's because of the reality of where he is with his treatment for his cancer. Maybe it's Benedict's fault. But as I was looking at cards, which they don't make birthday cards for $79, they make them for $75 and for $80. And I thought about converting some of them, but I didn't. But it's an interesting experience to buy a card for my dad and using Benedictine spirituality to ask myself, what if this is the last birthday card I buy for him? And how would that change and shape the card itself? Should I buy a sentimental card, or should I buy a funny card? Benedictine spirituality embraces that. It brings forth this type of thought. And so I went and searched for the funniest card I could find. That's the one I went with. Mom and Dad owned the Episcopal bookstore, and they sold lots of greeting cards. Most of them are sentimental in nature. And the card that I got they would never sell at their store. And so I think that's the one. But that's the hard part of practicing this particular style of Christianity, and having that presence, acknowledgement of God's presence and of death. So I don't see any questions, and normally this is a very inquisitive group, so nope. All right, so we will go ahead and jump into what is hospitality. So I'm going to start today with a question. What is hospitality to you? What is hospitality before you read the book? And if you have read this section, has your idea or your notion of hospitality changed? So, what is hospitality to you? Rick?
Why again? It's the lawnmowers outside. I wasn't ready to answer yet.
That's all right.
Sorry.
Am I being inhospitable?
No.
No, okay, good.
I'm trying to figure out what I think about it versus what I've read and reread this morning about it. It's got me more confused than ever.
Oh, excellent. Good. That means we're getting somewhere. Good. That means that old patterns of thought, if you will, the synapses in your brain, are starting to find new connection points. So, excellent.
Thank you.
Rick and I had a great discussion about the brain yesterday with the rest of the men's group, and that conversation has continued. So hospitality. Anyone else?
I have a comment.
Yes, Gloria.
Reading the chapter, and I guess it came up at the very end, and it said hospitality doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a huge event.
Yeah.
And I think about the things, I'm not going to say that I've done a huge amount of things that are hospitable, but I think on the things that I have done in my life that I didn't consider them hospitable. I just thought it was the right thing to do at the right time. Or I needed to respond to either one person or to other people. And now I realize that those little things that I did, it was hospitality. And then I remember things as a child that my father did, or my grandmother, or my grandfather, and it was hospitality. That's what they were giving to other people. Sometimes it was to my brothers and sisters and my father. Other times it was in the community, and it was hospitality. And reading this, I'm realizing I have seen it over my life, and it makes me grateful that in my own life and the things that I've done, the little things that I've done, and not that I think that they were huge by any stretch, that I was responding to God's will.
Yep.
So that's my message. That's
Awesome.
this is what I got from it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gloria. Excellent. For those that identify not with Mary, who sat at Jesus' feet and listened to his teachings, but those who identify with the other sister, Martha, who was in the kitchen, who was doing all the work, this chapter is for you, Martha. This is showing that you are doing God's work and God's will by being hospitable and serving others, sometimes in big ways, most often in small ways of welcoming. And it is that recognition that you're doing it for the Lord that I think that's a very powerful part of hospitality. Hospitality in the early church is what set Christianity different than the other religions. the sense of having an open door, of having water on hand to give to a stranger. But most of the hospitality in the early church that got known for what we do is the gift of presence and of listening and of understanding and of forgiveness. That all of that is in hospitality. And I think this is what the 21st century church will be doing. And that is reliving into this hospitality. And in some ways it can be having hot dogs and a jumpy house and welcoming the community. But in most ways it is in the small things and making a place and presence for people. And I say that as I watch yet another wheelbarrow full of concrete coming in. Is it concrete or cement? I think it's cement. Anyway, this is All Angels, and our hospitality to the Longboat community of having this beautiful prayer place that is now open, where anybody of any mobility at any time of the day is welcome to come up. In fact, I've been working on this thing. This has nothing to do with our book, but I was trying to think of like what the signs should be, or what signs we should have around that would indicate that all are welcome to come up and to spend time to reflect and to pray. And I've been thinking about that. And the sign that keeps coming to mind is the sign that says, trespassers will be forgiven. And I think that would be kind of fun. So I'm working on that. Anyway, so it's about hospitality. And thank you, Gloria. Thank you for sharing all of that. Yes, Rick.
Just a quick note. It's concrete, which is made from cement.
Thank you.
Thank you. I had a baker tell me that cement is the flour, concrete is the cake.
Yes, good way to look at it.
All right, good. So, but I get those two confused. And like interchanging the word that and the word which are not interchangeable, I tend to do that with cement and concrete. So I will now go into a screen share and show you our outline for today. And hopefully this can be seen by you all online. And now I am clicking on all sorts of wrong things. So there we go. I'm changing my screen around so I can see it better. Well, and it's not working the way I want it to, so we'll just do this. All right. So she asks, when we think about hospitality, what comes to mind? Perhaps it's having friends over for a special dinner. We've spent time planning and preparing. We may use our best china with the coordinating silver and elegant crystal wine glasses, or offer a relaxed, fun barbecue or party. We might prepare foods for the children and even have fun activities for them to enjoy the time together while the grown-ups converse around the table. This certainly is hospitality. Yet hospitality can be so much more. It comes from the Latin word hospitalis, which, just a second, I am switching, there we go, which comes from the word hospice, or guest. And for those that have spent time with people in hospice, now you know where the word comes from. So we show hospitality to others when we receive them as guests. And the main role of hospice, the end of life or palliative care, is to bring people in as guests, to understand that death is near and that this is a time for us to transition into what God is calling us next. So she writes that with Benedict, we can receive people in this way every day, every hour, and not just for a meal. I can even show my hospitality to you as a guest by receiving you warmly into this book. Hello and welcome again. So receiving you warm and welcomely into our class in any way or shape or time that you are participating, welcome. We are putting all of this together for you. So with Benedictine hospitality, Benedict writes that this quote from Matthew and from Matthew 25, all guests who present themselves are to be welcomed as Christ, for he himself will say, I was a stranger and you welcomed me. Matthew 25 is the story that Jesus said about the end of time. Angels will gather all together like sheep and goats. They will separate out the sheep from goats, and with the sheep he will say, welcome into my everlasting kingdom, because when I was a stranger, you welcomed me. That's the passage. So this is where Benedict then went in with hospitality, to say it's welcoming. And so we can go further along into welcoming, and then the next spot is this. Benedict believes we not only are to receive Christ in others as a guest, we are to be Christ to others. And then Benedict faces us with two very simple questions. Did we see Christ in them? Did they see Christ in us? Did we see Christ in them? Did they see Christ in us? This is the core of Benedictine hospitality and spirituality, to receive Christ and to be Christ to others. This requires practice. You will not get this right every time. We will fail and fall, and we have to get back up again. So I don't want to put this notion or this idea out there that there is a perfect way of doing it. It's not. It's a struggle. And this is why people enter into a monastery, into a nunnery, that they are practicing these two very simple questions. Did we see Christ in the other and welcome them? And did they see Christ in us? So she goes on to talk about the Benedictine balance of balancing hospitality and solitude. And this is an important balance, because this chapter largely is written for those who would identify as Martha, who like to work and to serve. Hospitality requires a balance of solitude, that you can do so much hospitality that you will ruin your own solitude and that you will burn out. And that is not, that's not what we should be doing, that we have to balance these things together. She writes that too often immersing ourselves in the needs of others can lead to resentment. So too often immersing ourselves in the needs of others can lead to resentment. Benedict has us strike a balance. And remember that even Jesus went off by himself to pray and to refresh his spirit. He got interrupted all the time, but he did that. He went off to go pray and to refresh. Imagine a resentful Jesus. That would not be a good shepherd. So we need to find and strike up this balance from one balance to another. So the last part of this is, as you probably know, the teaching of Jesus could be summed up in one word, which is love. We are to love God and our neighbors as ourselves. Again, recognizing this cannot be done perfectly, it is hard to do, but this is our goal, is to love God and love our neighbors. The entire rule of Benedict can also be summed up in the same word of love. It is the underlying motivation for all the action that Benedict describes for his monks and for us. Everything in the rule points to Christ and to the Christ-like love that we are to model in our lives. This indeed is as countercultural today as it was in Benedict's time. And he says, your way of acting should be different from the world's way. The love of Christ must come before all else. You are not to act in anger or nurse a grudge. You're to rid your heart of all deceit. Never give a hollow greeting of peace or turn away someone who needs your love. Again, these are very hard principles to live into, but it is that very nature that we are aiming for. So, and this particular one, never give a hollow greeting of peace or turn away someone who needs your love. So, you might wonder, okay, but what about this or that? And I'm looking at my Zoom participants to see if you are thinking the same thing that I'm thinking. Aren't there rules? Aren't there people who might abuse that? And what do we do with them? So the interesting thing to me is that I have now the 10th anniversary edition because a very generous parishioner has bought this on Amazon and sent it to me. So I now have this copy. The interesting thing is that what is on your handout for page 126, where it says discipline and forgiveness, is actually not found in this edition, at least not that I could find. And so this is the interesting thing for me, is that it's not here. So if you happen to have the handout, if you can go to page 127, I need to talk about something very specifically, and this is about people that can harm or have harmed and will harm again, okay? What to do about that. And so this is from Rule 27 with Benedict. The abbot, and the abbot is the one who's in charge of the monastery, is the shepherd or the bishop, if you will, of the group. The abbot is to treat the wavering brother. So the wavering brother is the one who has done wrong and has harmed either an individual, harmed the ecology, or harmed the community. So the abbot is to treat the wavering brother with the skill of a wise physician. Older and more mature brothers could be sent to unofficially talk to the wayward brother, to encourage him to humbly make amends, and to conform him so that, to comfort him so that he may not be overwhelmed by excessive sorrow. Okay? So that's step one. You have older, more mature monks go in using the skill of a wise physician and to talk to the wayward brother to make amends. Benedict instructs the other monks to pray for the errant monk, again emphasizing the desire not for punishment but for reconciliation. This is where things get a little interesting, and this is in chapter 28 of his rule. If a monk refuses to make amends, the punishment increases to, for example, beatings. So I think this is why it didn't make it into the 10th anniversary edition. We're going to, not severe beatings, but like you would imagine, a spanking. The monastery that I was involved in my undergraduate work, I went to a Benedictine university, we have monks there. They never touched I mean, there was no beatings, nothing like that. But there is, if you will, timeouts. So if a wayward monk has not made amends and is continuing to do the bad behavior, there is a way for them to put them into a timeout. And so the last step is the surgeon's knife. And that is where the monk would be asked to leave. Benedict again draws on Scripture and says, "Drive out the wicked person from among you." The door may not be shut, however. According to the rule, brothers who leave and want to come back can be readmitted up to 3 times. So Benedict, not 4, 3. Benedict was willing to give his brothers repeated opportunities for forgiveness and reconciliation. You and I might pause for a moment and consider if we're willing to do the same. So this is about hospitality but not to be hospitable to abuse. This is a way that we can make a space for others and to care for others, but also, like a wise physician, there are ways to treat the sick and wayward body. And that comes to making changes, making stronger changes, and then to cutting somebody out. So for as much as you will hear in this book and in what I'll be going over about the stick-to-itiveness, so the ones that stick within that maintain a relationship and are within it, please know that that does not include being a punching bag or having verbal abuse, that, like a wise physician, has to be cut out and dealt with. So just as long as we can cover all of that. I'm actually thinking about emailing Jane Tomaine and asking her about this chapter and why that part is missing. But there it is. So on page 152 in the 10th anniversary edition of the book, or page 127 in the non-10th anniversary edition, we then move to hospitality and good zeal. So zeal can mean jealousy, passion, fervor, or ambition. And this is what Benedict would term as wicked or evil zeal, which separates us from God. It's self-serving, lacking in moderation, and void of consideration for others. Benedict asks us to practice instead what he calls good zeal, which draws us to God and to eternal life. Good zeal is rooted in hospitality. It means supporting one another without murmuring and without grumbling. Again, the good side of Martha is that she was practicing hospitality and opening her home to Jesus and to the rest of the disciples. However, she got Jesus' attention and started grumbling about her sister Mary. Will you please do something about my sister? So good zeal is rooted in hospitality, but not murmuring or grumbling. It means giving up oneself to others with joy, to seek what is agreeable to one's neighbor, to console them, to cheer them, and as such is the true zeal of charity. So, giving oneself to others with joy, seek what is agreeable to one's neighbor, and to cheer them, and such is the true zeal of charity. With good zeal. This might sound strange, but my son Elijah, who's 10, has found that in the state of Florida, they sell fireworks now year-round. So to blow off some steam, if you will, we went out and purchased some firecrackers and some bottle rockets and some smoke balls. And as an act of good zeal, Elijah went over to our next door neighbor, which is directly in front of us. So we share the street in front of us, and that's where we shoot these things off, is in the street in between. And he went over and knocked on their door because it was a nice, pleasant day. Their windows were open, and they were watching TV. And he said, we're going to shoot off some bottle rockets and some firecrackers. Just want to know if that's okay with you. Is that going to bother you? And that's when our neighbor said, only okay if I can come out with you and play. And so our neighbor, he came out, and he happened to be playing ukulele at the time. He's an interesting, fun neighbor. And so we're having fun, setting off bottle rockets and doing what we do. And then another neighbor from a different house down came out and said, are you guys shooting off fireworks? And we're like, yeah. And he said, hey, my dog is just going nuts right now. He's not responding well to the fireworks. And good zeal. I'm sorry. We'll stop right now. And then we packed it up and went in. So that's Elijah practicing the true zeal of charity. He was actually practicing hospitality while shooting off some firecrackers. So that's the good zeal in action. It's showing, as Benedict would write, showing mutual respect, being patient with one another's weaknesses, outdoing one another in showing obedience, and pursuing the best for the other rather than for oneself, loving others and fearing God. So again, it's a practice. It's a step-by-step thing of being able to do that, of trying to outdo one another in obedience and pursuing the best for others. So before we continue on to page 155 in the 10th anniversary edition, I'm asking if any of you, do you have any questions or thoughts? If this is sitting okay?
It's not a question, it's a thought. I still have a lot of trouble, a great deal of trouble, and I don't know how to get past it, where if the monk refuses, this I'm reading out of the handout you gave, the part that's missing in the 10th anniversary. If he, where is it here? If the monk refuses to make amends, punishment increases in intensity, for example, beatings. I didn't go back to look at what Rule 28.1 specifically says, but that to me is absolutely counter to everything else he's been saying.
Right.
And then, readmitted up to 3 times. Why 3 times? Why not 7 times? Why not 70 times? Why not an infinite number of times? If you're looking to see Christ in the monk and you see Christ in yourself, you've just thrown that person away at 4 times. Mm-hmm. And I can't seem to, and I went back over that and I looked in the 10th anniversary, which is the one I'm using, and I thought, maybe this was just too much for people, and she took it out entirely. But
right,
it's there. Once the words are there, they're always going to be there. And
exactly.
I don't know how to deal with that. I really don't. I'm at a real loss.
Yeah. And it's hard to say if it was practiced in severity. I imagine it was. And I know it's not, at least from my own experience, I don't think it's being practiced now. But we have a 3 strikes rule. And for repeat offenders, that after the 3rd strike, there's no parole. And that is, Washington State was one of the first to enact this for its own state laws. And many had raised what about Peter's question of how many times should I forgive someone? Up to 7 times? And Jesus didn't say, no, not 7, 3. That wasn't Jesus' words. The flip side is, at least in the case of Washington State, there were repeat offenders that just would seem to continue to harm society. And so the idea of 3 strikes is that they are then incarcerated and will not be out to reoffend. This is not an easy subject to go on. There are some pastors and other religious writers who have said there are some family members that although you forgive what they have done in the sense that you're not going to carry that baggage anymore, that you will not forget and you will not include them back into the family because there are some things that have been broken. There are other religious writers and pastors who will say that you always keep the door open and that you're always trying. In a setting where it's a monastic community, a small organized group of men living together, it seems as if Benedict had found his limit. So he's human, and this is what he wrote. So I don't think we're doing it now, but how many of you have heard the phrase, spare the rod, spoil the child? Not that the Marshall family doesn't live by that, but many do, and I'm not, it's a tough thing. And how does that fit into hospitality? I think the reason why I've highlighted this is that I wanted to, many have said that Christians are like a doormat, and that turn the other cheek meant that you could always be hit by somebody and you're always supposed to forgive those people who hit you. No, that's not what he was saying. and Christianity is not that type of doormat. So there has to be a balance, and I, like you, Rick, disagree with his balance here, but at least I don't want to run from it. I want to have it right here to show that it's there. And I think that practicing your own balance in your own family and your own heart, of knowing how many times you would be willing to readmit, I think it would be a case-by-case basis. So, but I appreciate you bringing that up, Rick. And I have no magic way of reconciling this. So Martin Luther wrote some things that we never talk about in his thoughts around people of the Jewish faith. These, once it's written, it's there, and so these are humans, and they have failed from time to time, like me, and so there it is. But Rick, I'm glad you brought it up. Do you have any more thoughts on it?
Well, things like that have always bothered me. I understand the not forgetting and perhaps being attuned to somebody. I mean, if you use the 3 strikes and you're out type of thing.
Right.
It's one of our biggest businesses in New York State is putting people like that away. You don't forget what's happened. You don't excuse what's happened, but you do forget it. And I don't know, there's something about that that has always bothered me, and I guess that's enough for now. I don't know where I'm going with it, but the whole notion of the punishment increases, and eventually it's as though you're trying to break the person.
Yeah. And
I've never been one who has found that an appropriate way. I don't even like the term breaking horses.
Right.
It's kind of breaking the spirit of the human to get them to bend to your particular will, and they may never do it. So.
Right.
That's enough. Thank you.
Thank you. The parenting books that Christy and I read with Ethan talked about breaking the child in the crib, in the sense that if the child is crying, you go in and you do a particular thing, you set the child down, and then you wait 10 minutes and the child's still crying, you go in, and then you wait a half an hour, and then you don't go in at all. And the child cries throughout the night and eventually will learn to sleep through the night. There are new parenting things written that are saying, no, that's, the child's crying for a reason. And
right.
So, yeah, but they were using the phrase breaking the child. And I think they were talking about breaking the habit as opposed to breaking the child, but still. We learn and we keep moving on.
Well, not directly related. We had something in Canada called the residential school system, and for decades and decades, it was to break the children of the indigenous folks deprived of speaking their native languages, to taught them the ways of the Western world. It simply went on, and it was supported by religious groups across the spectrum. They, of course, have all been closed today. There has been a Truth and Reconciliation process that has been enacted over the last decade, and there's great remorse that this ever took place, and we're trying to learn from this and go forward. But while it was ongoing, it was de rigueur. It was the norm, and corporal punishment was a dimension of the breaking of those children. Vestiges of that were in all of our schools across the country. I mean, I'm sure that you folks all lived in fear of getting the strap from the principal and so on. Not today, of course. put a kid in the closet and close the door because he's just a perpetual problem. It's not tolerated today. So we have learned, but the stigma and stain still there, and we're trying to erase it, but it's not erasable, unfortunately. But there is a similarity. I mean, that was an institutionalized thing, which was appropriate for our society at that time. It's no longer appropriate. Things change. They're dynamic. Tomorrow, as you say, is a new day, new challenges. We can't predict tomorrow, but we can certainly look back and be ashamed of yesterday.
Yep, exactly. I've been reading about the Anglican Church of Canada and its role in that, and how it has been attempting to make amends. And yeah, all we can do is, we can't change history, we can just learn from it. And I think that would go for this as well, that we can't change it, we simply can learn from it. I hope that it won't reflect negatively on the rest of what Benedict has talked about. And I don't think it will for you all, but I wanted to highlight that. So, any other thoughts before we move on? All right, and I'm just going to check our YouTube feed to see if I have a question there. Nope, okay. So now we're going to go to there we go. All right, so page 155 in the 10th anniversary edition is where we have Benedictine hospitality and our baptismal covenant. And I'm looking at our time to see, yeah, so we're going to go through that. So hospitality is the gift of presence. So this is what I wanted to spend the rest of our time addressing, and that is, it's this. Hospitality is the gift of presence. Hospitality is an incredible gift that we can give one another. It all begins when we can be truly present to another person. And when we are present, focusing on the person before us, or acknowledging the need of people who live far from us, we become channels for the Spirit of Christ. This is, I think, one of the hardest things for us to do. And maybe it's just the hardest thing for me to do, and I am transposing that onto everybody else. But so in the original edition, it's tool number 2. In the 10th anniversary edition, this is tool number 4 on page 160. And this is the be present to others, hospitality to those who are near. So this is the hospitable side of Mary, who was present to Jesus and knowing the time that they had the Messiah in their house, and so being present. And when you give others your full and complete attention, you welcome them into your life. They know that you're respected and cared about, even if they're strangers or casual acquaintances. Being fully present often takes great patience and understanding. So as Christ emptied himself to become human, you will need to empty yourself of whatever is pulling you away. These may be pressures such as responsibilities, a need to control, or to hurry another person along. Whatever distracts you, ask God to help you concentrate on the person before you right at the moment, and ask God to help you listen for who God needs you to be for that person. And then there are some points to this. And the difficulty for this is for those of us that have been in vocations and occupations where we are in customer service or vendor relations or in sales or in marketing. During the day, we are called to be present to our vendors, to our customers, to our boss, to all of that, that we are to be present and to listen and that helps the business or the Air Force move along, right? That it's about listening and having patience and understanding with people that you're working with. I have found that it is harder to do that at home after spending a day of doing that with people who are not members of my family. And that when I get home, my patience understanding cups are pretty full. And so I would say that it is even more important to be present with those that we love and share a home with our family members, to be more present with them than we are even at work. And I can say these things, but I know it's very hard to do. So, so again, I'm just addressing that it's there. And so our author goes in, Jane goes in to explain that in the 10th anniversary edition, there's a bullet point right here. And that bullet point says, turn off the cell phone or whatever device is distracting you. And I was out with a group of clergy colleagues, and we had a game that we played. And that was the first one of us, there's 4 of us, clergymen, and the first one of us to pick up his phone and to look at it is the one who will pay for lunch for everybody else. And so that was our way of intentionally practicing hospitality with each other. And so it is more difficult than we could ever imagine about not looking at the phone. So she writes, so turn off the cell phone and to be present with one another. The second one is expect interruptions. Hospitality happens on God's timetable and not ours, and that we are to be flexible. The most important work we have to do each day is with the people Christ brings to us. Be open to interruptions, for that is where life happens. I think that what she's talking about here, at least in my own perspective, is that as a priest, I have a lot of behind-the-scenes work that needs to get done. I run a weekly. I say this often. Doesn't have to be done right. It has to be done on Thursday. So it's a weekly thing that we've just got this pace that we're on. And so especially on Thursdays when I am trying to get everything done, that's usually when I get interrupted for a hospitality moment. Somebody needs to speak to me or talk to me. And it is very difficult to set down the things that have to get done in order to be open for hospitality, but that's the way that it works. The next one is to receive the other as Christ. So if you remember the initial question, have you received the other as Christ, and have you been Christ to others? So when you meet someone, be it a friend or someone new, greet the Christ within that person. You can even imagine that you're talking to Christ. And how would that change your interaction? Remember that seeing Christ and serving others as Christ is not about them, it is about ourselves. So when you and I choose to look on a stranger, a family member, or a member of our community, a church member, coworker, or a person who serves us in a store as Christ, we don't change them, we change ourselves. Have you ever been to dinner with someone who was not treating the server with a great deal of respect, and how uncomfortable that is for everybody else at the table? It is about treating the person, the waitress, waiter, treating them as Christ and being open. So, and by doing that, we don't change anybody else, but we change ourselves. And so then, since I'm talking about things that are very difficult, we'll just continue. So create a free space for hospitality. Instead of viewing the stranger with fear, ambivalence, or hostility, we can create a free space where the stranger can enter and become a friend instead of an enemy. Yeah, very hard to do. I had a particular parishioner at a different church who, with each one of my reflections, he would write down on the bulletin, make some edits, make some changes, and trying to strengthen my argument. And I raised this in front of my clergy colleague group, the very ones who we said, whoever picks up the cell phone first buys lunch for everybody else. And I brought some examples with me, and I said, I am having a very hard time greeting this parishioner Sunday morning because I imagine that this person will hand me an edited version of something I've already written. And one of my friends looked at me and said, oh, he's trying to be a friend. And I said, wait a minute, this guy is acting like an enemy. And I was like, no. Change the way you're looking at this. He's trying to be a friend. So next time he hands it to you, say, this is great, can we go to lunch on Tuesday and talk about it? And so sure enough, the next time this person did this, I received it, looked at it, and said, are you free on Tuesday for lunch? I would like to talk about this. And we had the best lunch. And then we would meet every couple months for lunch and just have these fantastic, wonderful, friendly conversations. And so that is creating a free space where the stranger can enter and become a friend instead of an enemy. Have I been able to do this every time? Absolutely not. I continue to fail at this. But if not for my clergy colleague group to lead me down this path, I don't know what I would have done. And I'm afraid that I would have gone back to Rule 28 and maybe cut this guy off from, at least emotionally, from myself. And called not to do that. So creating this space requires, she writes further, creating this space requires an inner conversation, an inner conversion that can't be manipulated. Yet even though this conversion must develop from within, we still can take some steps. So the first one, you'll notice this with all Benedictine spirituality, it begins with prayer. So pray for God to create this empty space within you. And then when you meet a stranger, imagine a friendly, empty space. So first pray to create this empty space, and then when you meet with the stranger, imagine that friendly, empty space around. Look on the stranger with the eyes of hospitality. Be open and even curious about the gift they may be ready to give you. Allow them to be themselves and discover who they are in your presence. So on page 161 in the 10th anniversary edition, she actually added some things on after number 2. All right. She writes that when you feel like escaping, remember stability and obedience. There will be times when you would rather run from practicing hospitality. When this happens, remember the Benedictine vow of stability, to remain present. Then move into the vow of obedience to listen and respond. And ask God to help you listen to how you are to be a co-creator through your own hospitality. And that she continues to go on to recognize too that there may be times when you don't have the energy or the wherewithal to be hospitable. But before fleeing physically or mentally, give it a try. Remember that when the Lord went off to rest, the crowds followed him, and he must have been tired and wanted to be alone, yet he had compassion on the people who followed him and attended to their needs. So that is, when you feel like escaping, remember stability and obedience. And then the last 2 that, again, didn't make it into the first book is hospitality need not be a huge event. And this is what we had brought up in the beginning of the class. If hospitality means making room for another person, even in small ways, what could you do differently to become a more hospitable person? Again, this is a step-by-step system. This isn't doing it all right all the time. This is, if you're worn out and you're trying to be stable, think of what small way you could do differently to become a more hospitable person. And last is be hospitable to yourself too.
I didn't understand that.
And now my phone is talking to me. So it says be hospitable to yourself too. Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. Take time to care for yourself in body, mind, and spirit. So create room be hospitable to yourself. That might be one of the hardest parts for some that are listening and participating in today's class, is to be hospitable to yourself, to create room, to create your own space, to create your own forgiveness. And if there are any Marthas who are participating today, Marthas find this particularly difficult to create a space to be hospitable for themselves on the inside. But it is what I think Jesus is calling us to do. All right, so with that, I now am going to open for questions.
Comment on the last, be hospitable to yourself.
Uh-huh.
As a longtime caregiver, care partner, and one who has taught this for decades, it all boiled down to a phrase that a friend of mine shared with me perhaps a year ago when we were discussing this at quite a distance. This person said, "The pipe that waters also needs to be kept wet." It's just a different way of looking at it, but pouring out all this to other people, you've got to do some for yourself also.
So the pipe that waters also needs to be kept
Wet.
wet. And you can't let your pipe run dry.
It's what we hear on airplanes all the time. When the oxygen mask comes on, put it on yourself. You can't be of help to somebody else if you can't breathe. You can't continue to pour water out if you're not kept wet. I mean, strange analogy, but it works.
It does.
And that's the first rule of all caregiving, care partnering. It sounds very selfish, but you must absolutely, under 100% of all circumstances, take care of yourself first.
Why is this so very difficult, Rick? I guess, we have several dear friends whose spouse has had a serious dementia, or perhaps more serious, and we have said that to them. You must look after yourself, because we could watch them deteriorate as they try to continue to be the same supportive person to a person whose life was diminishing, if that's a fair thing to say, and to the point where they become incapable of serving themselves, creating their own space. I find this a very difficult thing to get my mind around, because we know they're exhausted in caring, and when they go into a hospice or they go into a home, the grieving seems to become even more burdensome. That's a rhetorical question. I know you've told me about this a number of times, Rick, but it is something that does trouble us. We don't understand it. And of course, the reason that we're trying desperately to get our minds around this is because, we're both here together. We are dependent on each other. We're totally committed to each other. And we could see this same sort of thing happening. So I'm not sure where the inner strength comes from.
One quick thought on it. It's not the ultimate answer by any stretch of the imagination, but a good deal of it revolves around the perception that it's being selfish. There's always something more that you can do for the other person. And if you take time for yourself, you're not giving to that other person. And eventually, as you've just articulated, that individual is not going to be able to give to the other person. And the statistics show it. I mean, if you believe statistics, people who follow this path in not caring for themselves while caring for somebody else develop very serious illnesses and die early. I mean, it really is a killer of persons who are engaged in lifelong, or in long-term, long-term care for another person. But I think that the simplest most straightforward explanation is that it's perceived as being selfish. I just can't take time for myself. I've got to give more to somebody else, and the more I do, the better it is. Pretty soon you run out. The well runs dry completely, and then you have no more to give to that other person.
Gail, I can't hear you. I see you're talking, but if you can, there we go, yes.
Sometimes I think that the caregiver feels, for whatever reason, that no one else could give the care as well as they can.
Oh, yeah. That's certainly a part of it. You know, I know that person. I know what she or he needs, wants, desires, all the inner thoughts. There isn't another person on the face of the earth who could do it the way I do it. Yes, absolutely. You're totally on target with that also.
Right, and I might be foolish in this, but I think there's wisdom in that. I mean, I think, you know, that you care for that person deeply, and that you know that person really, really well. But the flip side is, you have to let another pilot take the plane, right, Larry? I mean, even though the pilot may not be as experienced as you need the rest. But it's so hard to do. The interesting thing to me, Rick, is that Ward Maxon would say that we have this animal interior self-preservation type thing. And it's interesting that as we care for somebody and start to wear ourselves down, Ward's thought of having the internal animal instinct of self-preservation doesn't seem to kick in.
No, we override it. It kicks in, but we simply ignore it. We override it. We say, no, what I feel that I'm doing is far more important than what my body is telling me I should be doing, which is basically back out for a little bit, take some rest, get the stress level down, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. Yes, he would be exactly saying that.
Like, I feel as if I'm channeling him. But that's exactly what Ward would, I think. He would bring that up. And it's fascinating that we can override that, because it seems as if animals can't. Maybe they can. Maybe we don't observe them enough. But, that's...
Animals can. I won't go down that path. I started that yesterday, but there's a great deal of new evidence that I won't share here and with anybody who doesn't want it, that animals actually are conscious and capable of the kinds of thoughts that we have.
Right.
I mean, the brain structure is behind that, so it works.
Interesting.
But anyhow, yeah, I think we override it and use the higher conscious powers to just say, no, this is wrong. I've got to keep doing this.
Right. So we're, as a family, we're watching The Cosmos. That's on Fox. Neil deGrasse Tyson is the astrophysicist and wonderful author, is the host. And the one that was I think it was just aired because we watched it recently. I mean, it wasn't the one last night, but the one before last week. He talked about this horrible, horrible study that was done with these particular mountain monkeys, and they live in the hot tubs, not hot, in the hot springs, and they have snow on their heads. They're very cute, but they are known to have very high, complex minds, and they have compassion for one another. And so they took some into cages, and then gave them electroshocks and wouldn't feed them. So they had learned that if they give an electroshock to another monkey, that they themselves will get food. And they wanted to see if compassion for knowing what the electric shock feels like and the pain, would they deliver that pain to another monkey in order so that they could eat? And horrible, horrible study. But they came up with the conclusion. They had one monkey that did not eat for 2 weeks because it refused to give pain to another monkey so that it could eat. And fascinating study about their own brains, compassion, hunger, and I guess with that study, it reaffirms that we can override that centered desire for preservation. But it's such a strong thing to want to care for others, and even while we are losing ourselves in the process. So, as you had said, the pipe that waters also needs to keep wet or to stay wet. That's a hard, hard principle. But I never said this class would be easy. I didn't say, oh, this book's simple, it's a breeze. You know, you can do this, easy. Well, good. Any other thoughts?
I have a comment. With respect, Gloria, you said something.
Larry, if you can lean in a little bit closer, we can't hear you.
With respect, Gloria, you said at the very outset that you in terms of spiritual hospitality, you were moved by what you consider was common sense, or something along that line. I find that this whole business of spiritual hospitality, as we've been discussing it, can be quite a test. It so often in my life, I will encounter mavericks, like the one you talked about, Father Dave, about the parishioner who really caused you a lot of difficulty, and then you discovered there's one in every parish, so you never quite gets any separation. I too had that experience, and I found that one of the things I had to overcome was when I reached out to do what I considered to be the right thing, and oftentimes it was very subtle. It was not a big event, just a subtle event, and it would be ignored. It would be received and attributed to something else entirely, and over time, I felt a little bit of discouragement as I reached out. I'm reminded of dear friends of ours, very wealthy, who live out on the west coast of Canada, and they're lovely people, and they have moved a lot because their hospitality has been rebuffed. She is a phenomenal cook. So the first thing in a new community is she has folks in for these wonderful dinners, and it scares the lights out of them, and they never get invited back. And so we've actually seen them leave the community because of a lack of reception of their well thought through hospitality. Now, that's coming back to the fundamentals of where we started in this thing. It's not lace tablecloths and chandeliers and crystal silverware. In this case, it was food, not the gluttony side of the.
There was some quality of it.
But the point being that it is a test, because hospitality has such a huge spectrum to it. It can be hospitality of thought.
Yes.
You don't do anything. You think positively about that person or that act, which you find repeatedly annoying and disturbing. And unless there's some other dimension to it, you try to think positive thoughts. My biggest critic sits beside me here, and I'll come home and I'll express some of this to Gail. I call it dumping on Gail, but it's something that has troubled me. So I do look upon this as a test, and of all that I've gotten out of these 5 chapters so far, or lessons so far, is this is not an easy subject. This is a challenge. But Gloria, what you said is how I have felt. And when I did something overt and felt it was received, I felt good. And the question is, well, did I do it for selfish reasons so I could feel good, or did I do it for truly spiritual, hospitable reasons? I wanted to do what Gloria said, and that was the right thing to do. So, you know, I come back and looking in the mirror at myself and saying, are you a good guy on the good days when you're not growling because you expect to have a positive feedback? Or are you truly trying to achieve the precepts and guidances of what we're studying with Saint Benedict? I leave you with that rhetorical question. I think it's something that's bothered me for a very long time.
Well, the Anglican side could say it's both, right? Can it both be self-serving and for a greater, higher spiritual purpose? You know, does it have to be one or the other? By the way, Ward would say it's purely selfish and it's based on animal desire. But
Stop with the Ward. I did have a quick thought, Larry. We can't process things simultaneously. You know, multitasking is an impossibility neurologically. So everything's sequential. So if the feeling good comes after the doing, then it's perfectly appropriate. You're doing it, you get that feeling after you've done something, as opposed to simultaneously, because we can't do things. We think we're doing them simultaneously, but the studies show that we're not. It's all in sequence, a very rapid sequence. So you look at it and say, I did this. I didn't do it with the intent of being praised or feeling good or anything. After you've done it comes the feeling good. That would be my quick interpretation.
Yeah.
I have a or to share. I personally am doing something now. Part of it is selfish, I believe. I'm doing something because why I'm doing it, it makes me feel good that I'm doing it. Then when I get finished with what I'm doing, I share it with someone else. The other person that I do it for, I'm also doing it for myself. And then I share it with the other person. The other person comes back to me and tells me what it means to them of what I've done. I go back to that person and I say, believe me, I'm doing it for a twofold reason. I'm doing it for me too. And it has to do with COVID now. I live in a community that people are way older than I am. So on Sunday, I cook a big meal. I normally don't do that anymore. I just cook enough to satisfy myself. But on Sunday, I go out of I go beyond what I would do just for me to do for someone else. But is that wrong to feel that way?
Well, no, it's not. It's a human instinct. I don't think there's a right or wrong here. It's what you feel inside that drives you. It's back to your original remark you made. You do it for spiritual reasons, for personal reasons, for common sense. It's the right thing to do.
yeah.
I do because I think it feeds it's feeding it's feeding me physically, but it's feeding me spiritually. It's feeding me physically.
Yes.
Mentally, it's feeding me. Because my life has changed so quickly over the last 5 months. Now I'm in a world where I can't start a new world. I can't, I'm not alone. There's many people like me I'm stuck. I'm literally stuck. I can't open the door and start a new life. With COVID, I'm locked in.
Yep.
I'm trying to do the right thing to be safe and not to get anybody else sick.
Yep.
But at the same time, if I have, and I've thought about this over the summer since I've returned to Pennsylvania, And I'm doing little things to let other people know that I care. And but I'm also caring about myself also. But I'm trying to care for others in little ways. They're very little. You know.
Yes. So we believe that Jesus was both human and God. And Rick, that was simultaneous, or maybe not. That's a whole different topic. But because we believe in the dual nature of Christ, which is why we have 2 candles on the altar to recognize both the human and the divine side, you can do an act that both feeds you spiritually and feeds somebody else at the same time. It can do both things. Coins have 2 sides. So it has, yes, and keep doing it. If that's feeding you, then keep going. Yeah, and don't feel, I wouldn't feel guilty about it at all. I would actually feel, I'm glad you're doing it. So,
I think that's marvelous, and I'm just going to put a quick word in, and then I promise I won't say anything more.
Really?
Well, no, I won't promise that. I'll try very hard not to say anything more. There is a concept that I was introduced many years ago, and actually I started writing about, that altruism is really biological selfishness.
Okay.
And you look at it and you say, what in the world does that mean? We reach out, we do something for somebody else, but in so doing, we also gain. So it comes right back to us. And there's a lot in the biological world that shows this to be happening. I think it's a very positive sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I listened to what you said, Gloria, and I thought, wow, isn't this fantastic? That people are benefiting from what you're doing, the time and the energy and expense you're putting into this, and it seems like maybe a little thing, but to them it's a huge thing. And why in the world would you look at, not you, why in the world would anyone look at it and say, this is wrong, this is selfish, this is a wonderful way of developing community maybe at a distance, to be with and for other people. I think that's a fantastic example. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for doing it. And Gloria, if I think about it, I still can conjure up the taste of your eggplant parmesan, and how you made that for us, and how we were so thrilled to have it, and you looked so happy to give it to us. And I thought, this is a perfect relationship. That we love it, and you genuinely, I think, enjoy helping us and serving. So, yeah,
I was born with a spoon in my hand.
Well, thanks be to God, and I'm glad that you're doing it. That is awesome. So keep it going. It's wonderful, and I look forward to next time you're in town. We get to enjoy and share. So,
And I will.
yes, absolutely. And I mean, these days will pass. God is calling you into a new reality. But as Jane Tomaine had pointed out, it's on God's time. It's not ours. And so it's just where we are.
We have to be patient.
Yes. Yes.
And that's hard.
Yes.
For me, anyway.
Yeah, it's rough. Yeah. Well, good. Well, this was class 6. We have a few more coming up, and I will send out what our next chapter is going to be, and I'm going to switch into the 10th anniversary and send this stuff out, because I think that helps. And but I'll do both of them. Well, and we'll see. Anyway, I'll do the best I can to have both of these. And I'm pulling up chapter 9, which is the holiness of labor, but I don't think that's next week. I think that's the following week. But the holiness of serving and helping others. It seems like it would be the next natural step for us to go to. So we'll see. Maybe I'll change the schedule up. But thank you for joining. Thank you for participating and spending the time with us to study and to learn, and to take this path of following Christ and being hospitable to one another, and let us always remember to be hospitable to ourselves. So may God bless you, watch over you. May God bless our nations as we continue down this road of what it is to be a republic. And may God continue to bless those who are dealing with the various hurricanes and the fires and all of those things we're dealing with in 2020. So God bless you and keep you, and I look forward to the next time we get to be together.
God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Bye.
Big Planned Parenthood